He is also a famous cryptographer and give us a representation about malicious cryptography. The title is on the screen. Let's welcome.
Thank you very much. You hear me, yes? Good. So I'm going to talk today about malicious cryptography and interesting issues with it. And I'll start by reviewing modern cryptography as a science. Then I'll talk about malicious cryptography, or the notion of repurposing a cryptographic scheme, which changes the goal of the scheme or adds to the goal. And then I will talk about Kleptography, also known as subverted cryptography. You know, cryptography is a Greek word meaning hidden writing. Klepto is a Greek word meaning thief, to steal. So that's a combination. Then I'll talk about something I called Kleptography, which is the anti-subversion. And then I'll talk about recent work in the last 2 years called Anamorphic Cryptography. I'll do motivation and I'll cover a few schemes, and then I will conclude. Okay? So cryptography as a science, its basic is mathematics, and then based on it, there are models, constructions, proof that the construction work according to the design, which is like a specification. And we have either mathematical proof that the scheme follows the specification, and for certain schemes, we don't know how to prove it, but then we have concrete best attack arguments. And cryptography evolved in 2 directions. First direction, foundations, defining, constructing, improving the cost, and proving property of basic properties that cryptography, of basic schemes and tasks that cryptography handles. And there's the applied side, which you have a primitive implemented with improved performance, then it is used in security and privacy systems. Okay? And the state of the art, the science of modern cryptography started in the 70s. First with symmetric key, open symmetric key. It started in 73 by NIST, the US government. And then public key that came from academia, Diffie-Hellman, RSA, and other people, Rabin, Blum, and so on. And then came foundations, which means it's not enough to have a scheme and have a heuristics. Experimentally, it works, and we don't know how to break it, which was the tradition for maybe 1,000 years before, for applied cryptography. But to have mathematical foundations that you can claim in this model with this attacker that I carefully modeled, and it really is capturing what we understand practice, then we have a security proof. And the security proof typically is by reduction or randomized reduction from an attacker that attacks a scheme, which is a dynamic protocol that runs between different users, to a static mathematical problem like factoring large numbers, or the index, or discrete logarithm in certain groups. or certain lattice problem that is considered hard. And usually these are assumptions because we don't really know the complexity of things. Complexity theory is a very hard discipline, but cryptography can be seen this way through the modern view of foundational and proofs of security as the applied side of complexity theory. If there is typically, if there is an algorithm, you want it to be very efficient, and then you can use it in applications. But cryptography, you want the basic algorithm to be hard, and therefore to have a cryptographic scheme that is hard to break, and so on. So this is the situation from the mid-70s when the field started till the mid-90s. And then everything is great. You know, we have theory, we have new primitives that we prove that we can implement them based on accepted mathematics. And everything is great. But I claim, you know, it's a field that has been only for 20 years around. And if everything is so great, something is wrong. It means the field has not been scrutinized enough. And then came the mid-90s. In fact, two papers in the same conference, Crypto 96, in the same session, one after the other. I wrote them in the opposite order of presentation. So one was a side channel attack by Paul Kocher, who observed that cryptographic computation is actually computation, and computation has physical properties like energy that it consumes. And then maybe observing this energy consumption, you can learn something about the key. So it's not only that you have a mathematical proof, like I say, oh, it's reduced to some known problem, but it has the physical aspect of, you know, circuits. So computer science is not just mathematics, it's also the physics of computation. And Paul cleverly showed how timing of computation can be exploited to find keys. And that became a revolution in the field. Now there is a conference, a yearly conference that is entirely devoted for that. And the other thing is, it was a paper that we presented, I'll get to it, but it essentially started malicious cryptography, and this is what I'm going to cover in this talk, so I don't need to elaborate more for now. So how computer science works and cryptography as well. You have a problem specification, and it has to have certain properties. And in cryptography, there are correctness properties, namely the scheme does what it's supposed to do. It is an encryption scheme, then it encrypts, and the guy who has the key can decrypt. And that's correctness, because if encryption would not be such that the decryption will give back the message, it will not be a good encryption scheme. And it has to have security property, namely a guy trying to learn from the system, either by observing or otherwise manipulating challenging the encryption algorithm, cannot break the algorithm. And this is what the foundations of cryptography insisted on: correctness and security. And then there is a construction, and then we have a proof by reduction to some number theoretic problem. And we prove that it achieves the correctness and achieves the security properties after formulating the adversary in a way that we understand it, and everybody else understands it and agreed. And then we declare victory. We have a primitive, a protocol, a system that is correct and secure. So we can go home. And the question is, does this implementation adheres to the specification of security and correctness, all that is needed? So usually it's okay, but in fact, we take the primitive and we embed it in a working environment. And supposedly the working environment is following the model. But are we sure that it follows the model? So I'll talk about malicious cryptography. So what is the interruption that it caused? It's the following. Cryptography is defense against bad behavior, protection. We encrypt, we sign digitally, and so on to protect either the integrity or the content of the information. What I observed in my co-author for that paper, is the following. So cryptography, you put it in a system, it becomes a security technology. But there are other security technologies that you put in systems, they do their work, they are added to the system, they do what they are supposed to do, but they also increase the system's attack vector. Think about the following. You take an antivirus software, you put in the system, and then you learn that this software also sends things from your device to the company of the antivirus. There's an attack. So these things are possible. So this leads the question about cryptography. Can we possibly change, reformulate, repurpose the primitive's goal without seemingly change the primitive? So the user thinks the primitive is doing its work, but it does also other things. Can cryptography be used for attacks? For other purpose than its main actual goal? Can we covertly repurpose a crypto system? And this gives rise to malicious cryptography. Because the idea is somebody is using the system and is doing what he's not supposed to do, and the system does what he's not supposed to do, so in some sense it attacks the user. Or the user uses it to do other things and attacks with it something. So this is the thinking. And why it is like this, as I said, we get correctness, we get security, but embedding and using the primitive is in an extended or modified service setting that may not follow only the model. What about extended safety? Is the service minimally achieving the guarantees of the model and not more? This is very hard property to check. This is like a Cohen-P problem, if you understand. To prove that something doesn't achieve more, it's almost reducible immediately to the halting problem in general computation, and it's undecidable. So the preliminaries of this thought led to two things. And the main thing to think about from an inspiration point of view or creative point of view is, it was not decided for that, so let's reverse its logic and do it nevertheless. This is the thinking. This is the thinking that can come from security research. So repurposed crypto system, and the first thing is repurposing a mechanism. And the first preliminary was in this paper, Escrow Encryption System Visited, Attacks, Analysis and Design, in 95. 95, it's almost 30 years ago. And the US government put the Clipper chip, which was an encryption mechanism combined with authentication mechanism, and in hardware. And the decryption mechanism was checking authenticating the source, and only then does the decryption. And this enables the government to authenticate the source as well, seeing who is the source, and gets the key of the source and also decrypt. And this is the way it's escrowed. And the government has the property to every message that is ever decrypted is also decrypted by the government, who can check among all the millions of users who is this user who encrypted, take his key that he deposited with the government voluntarily, or with the company if you wish it's done in a company level, and then decrypt. So what we did in this paper, we actually broke the mechanism. We show that the authentication mechanism and the decryption mechanism were not well coupled. So, but working on this gave me the purpose that the government now took encryption technology and repurposed it openly to do something else, to do authentication, but they didn't do it right. What did we do? We bought 3 chips of encryption, and we reverse engineered the logic, and we showed that you can take the authentication field of one chip, the encryption field of the second chip, take a message, send it, and the receiver will authenticate, will say, aha, it's good, and then decrypt it. So the splicing of the things was not good, the concatenation was not good, and we broke it. And then this project disappeared. And the second preliminary so this was repurposing the mechanism which I learned from the US government. The second thing is something that a paper that was in '96 called Cryptovirology, Extortion-Based Security Threats and Countermeasures. So this is a repurposed application. Nobody thought that cryptography is going to be an attack weapon. And what we did in this paper, we predicted all ingredients for a ransomware attack, including envisioning Bitcoin in the future. Saying in the paper it's written, there will be a mechanism for payment online and this will make it more effective. And countermeasures too, which were ignored for about 15 years until real attacks started. So people say, nice. And actually, if you go to the internet, you can see till today, somebody, a researcher who worked on viruses say, this will never happen. It's a $1 million annual industry in the dark, among criminals. So you can repurpose all cryptography to a new mechanism. So that was the second preliminary. And then, out of this type of thinking, that you can repurpose, reuse, extend purpose of cryptography, came malicious cryptography, as I called it, 3 stages. Kleptography, which is also known as algorithm subversion attack or subverted cryptography. Kleptography, I call it cryptography. Other people call it mitigating subversion, and then anamorphic encryption. So what do I mean by repurposing? So you have correctness and security, and the implementation P gives correctness and security, but P is replaced with another implementation, P star. And in the working environment, under the restriction of the working environment, the P star is indistinguishable from P, but it gives correctness, security, and side effect. And so came kleptography, also known as algorithm substitution attack, also called subversion attack. And we show that changing and hiding the algorithm or the parameters of the algorithm. So working a crypto system, the working environment is a black box that you have input, output. the attacker, the guy who manufactured the box or the guy who designed the algorithm and decides on parameters of the algorithm and so on, get exclusive access to the secret messages. So he steals your secret messages, hence the name Kleptography. So the first example was an RSA key with a factor of so a public key is a composite number n, which is a multiple of p times q. It will be n with a multiple of p like q that will be drawn almost from the same distribution of all n's, but this n will have in the middle of it p written, the secret. And then we did it for discrete log algorithm and so on and so forth. And I will tell you a little bit about that. And so it allows the attacker to modify the algorithm or to choose parameters or to do something funny and essentially add into the algorithm another asymmetric algorithm. There is some algorithm inside, but it's a public key of somebody. It's not the private key. So even if somebody reverses engineer the black box, he doesn't get the capability of the attacker. Definitely no one else. And this really reverses the logic of what the algorithm is supposed to do. And it shows how the authorities, manufacturers, designers can win this crypto war against the user. And this was, the first paper was this Crypto 96 paper. And then a few years we worked on it, and other people too. So I will give you the example. The example I'll give you briefly, not all details, but RSA key generation. RSA is one of the easiest to demonstrate. So essentially, RSA key generation, you do an RSA and you want 2048 bit key, so you choose a prime number, choose a large number, P is 1024 bits. If P is composite or some acceptable agreement that this number has to follow, admission test. If it doesn't pass the admission test or is composite, you choose again. So you try. At some point, you choose P. The second thing is from step 3, choose a large number Q. Same way, you look for the admission for this number. The encryption is fixed. It's 3, say. And then you do 3 and 4. You do the same thing, the same looping until you find a Q which is admissible. And then you just multiply P times Q. You have E as an input. P times Qn is the key, and knowledge of the factorization of n. Namely, if you know P, you break the system. And the receiver is the one that knows P and is the only one who can perform decryption. Everybody else can encrypt because encryption is done modulo n, and decryption is done with the knowledge of P and Q. Okay, so this is the normal one. And now, assume it is done in a black box hardware or in a software that nobody looks at or obfuscated. So the key generation is such that it will produce the usual number, n p times q, 2048 bits, but the hardware will have an extra RSA key of the attacker, which I call it y, which is y1 times y2. Only y is in the box, not y1 or y2. And the algorithm is going to use this. It's half the size. Okay? And then the kleptographic key generation. You choose a large number S, let's say 2024 bits. You compute P equals age of S, where age is some cryptographic one-way function. Think about it random oracle-like function, or essentially something that generates the distribution of its output is like a random function. It's really random. And call it P. If P is a composite and the admissible, you choose it. If not, you loop through 1, 2, 3 all the time. Then you find P. P you access not directly by choosing the random bit. You choose S, and you apply H to it, which is a pseudo-random function, which retain in some sense the randomness of P. And then you choose P, which is composite and admissible. And then you choose a large value. I call it R&D because it's random. Compute C to be the encryption of S. S is the seed that was generated to generate P. Encryption of S under the public key of the attacker, the Y that is in the black box of 10,024 bits, half the size of N, and call this C. Now take C and this randomness and think about it as a number. These are the high order bits and the low order bits of the random number. This part was chosen pseudo-randomly because S was chosen randomly. RSA on elements in the right group is just a permutation. So this is just another, this is a random number and this is a random number in some sense. This is then, now you have to go back to kindergarten because now we do mathematics of kindergarten. You have P and you have this number that I put low order and high order bits. And I do modular division. So I get P, I get quotient Q. Q is the quotient. And I have a reminder, R. Integer division, we all learned it in the kindergarten. I learned it in pre-kindergarten. If Q is a composite, that's it. We have to repeat the whole experiment. But lo and behold, if it is admissible, just output the public key, N, which is P times Q, and E that was determined as an input. And the private key is P or Q, one of the factors. So N is 2048 bits. It is a multiple of two large primes, P and Q. And it's an RSA key. And actually, there is a proof that using the distribution of random numbers and the prime number theorem to show and the pseudo randomness of age that everything is working as in the previous algorithm. You just choose P and Q. Almost the same. Very few, it's a big sub-exponential group of, you cannot distinguish between the two different ways of choosing things. However, this way of choosing, remember, N is P times Q. P times Q is this weird number we see here and random number here, minus R, the remainder. Back to kindergarten. So this, because this number was P times a quotient plus remainder. R is a remainder. But there is a property of the remainder that you learn in kindergarten. It is smaller than the number that you divide with. So it's about square root of the number. So when you do this R is not going to ruin the value of C too much. Maybe one borrow bit in the subtraction here. And that's the key. And that's the key. It's going to ruin the randomness when you do -r, and maybe borrow a bit on C. And that's the key. So the attacker can take the high order bits there. Two possibilities. They are upper plus 1, and one of them will give you back this number, this C, and C is the attacker, so he knows how to decrypt. C is an encryption by Y of the seed of S. So he has two candidates for C, C1 and C2, and then he recovers S1 and S2, and one of them should give P via age, which is a public function. So this, from the body of N itself, you can get a factor of NP. And that's the thing. And it's not just this, but you prove everything where N's are distributed almost accordingly to the usual algorithm. So black box, you don't know that there was an attack. You have to, any polynomial, if this black box chooses polynomially many keys, they all will look like they come from the distribution of the regular algorithm, not the kleptographic algorithm. And so this is the attack. Only the attacker can recover the secrets. For others in the system, this N is perfectly secure. Even if they reverse engineer, they find Y, but they cannot decrypt based on Y, because you need the factorization of Y. And that's it. Actually, in the first paper in '96, we wrote, oh, certain organizations may be liking this type of algorithm because it gives them unique power to read messages. Not everybody can read messages, but them. And so people say nice theory, one can reproduce a crypto system so that black box unscrutinized is, and so on. But people recognized it for its theory. We had many papers. We also had papers on discrete log systems and so on and so forth. People say nice theory. Until, you see, I say until 2012. This gentleman came 2 decades later, at least 15 or 16 years later, and he said, this mechanism has been used, and I read what he claimed. So he claimed that the dual EC deterministic random bit generator that was used actually has a built-in mechanism like this. And indeed, when I looked at the logic, the logic looked like one of previous papers of mine, actually combining two ideas from two different papers. And this, of course, renewed interest because it was not only theory anymore. I mean, I work on only theory problems, but when it's not theory, when people say, oh, it was used, now we have to take care of it, so there was renewed interest. And numerous work started how to clip down the power of kleptographic attack in 2014 and on. Some people wrote paper and they showed how this claim is verified. I didn't need it because I knew that it worked. I knew my paper. And I call it this effort to go against the kleptography, clipping the power of kleptographic attack. I wanted to remain in the cute names for this. So malicious cryptography thus far, this shows how the authorities, whoever the authorities are, can abuse cryptographic system by giving them extra repurpose And how to resist it? There are various results on how to do it, with if the crypto system is deterministic, if the key is unknown to the adversary, if you add elements to the architecture to assure something called reverse firewall, for people who know it, and so on, to try to wipe out the side effects of the system. So if the encryption can be re-randomized, the reverse firewall take an encryption, and before sending it, it's a trusted mechanism that re-randomizes the encryption. Sometimes you can re-randomize the encryption without changing the value of the clear text. And we wrote a paper, Kleptography, that's why I call it like this, in 2017. And what we did, we added offline watchdog that at the beginning, each element of the system is checking other elements of the system. And this is with a few co-authors. And let me tell you that implementations of cryptography, even without attacks, it's better to check them very carefully, because there are simple mistakes that can be made, and simple mistakes have failed crypto systems. So it's good always to have some testing. And recently, actually this year, we put a full version on the archive and ePrint, correcting subverted random oracle. So we have a function and some values of which is supposed to be random, and small elements in it are manipulated. Of course, if you manipulate all of it, it will be found just by implementing it separately and seeing and hitting a point which is different in both. But if you just manipulate parts of it, small parts of it, constant or logarithmic subset, then we show how to even correct random oracle, so that these values that people insert that are supposed to do kleptography are not there. Somebody can change and say, oh, if you ask me of this function, the value of 1,000, I will give you the seed of the function. And this is the way you can probe it and break the cryptography. And this is a mechanism how to correct it. So far, allowing the adversary to modify, subvert, change the algorithm, and allowing the algorithm architecture embedding or to take additional countermeasures to eliminate the subversion. And anti-subversion, working, it's also called post, like there is post-quantum. Some people call it post-Snowden cryptography. It's a combination of architecture and mechanism to deal with possible added leakages of the system. So the next is anamorphism, which was in Eurocrypt 2 years ago. This is repurposing cryptography for the user's advantage against strong adversary setting. The setting is such that think about the authorities asking you for the receiver, or the receiver key, give me your key, and even dictating which messages to send. So they even tell you, they dictate this message, this message, this message. Sometimes we call this adversary dictator because it dictates exactly the messages. So you give up fighting and you have to collaborate. Otherwise, your company will fire you if you don't give them the key. So you give them the key. But as cryptographers, we don't want to give up on secrecy. So this is led to anamorphism. And of course, people ask, what is anamorphic, what is anamorphism, and this is, so before you ask, I know anytime I give the talk about this subject, people ask, so I answer before you ask. It's a term in the arts, in painting and so on. So if you move to a different angle around the piece of art, you will see a second painting. Okay, you know, you look at it this way, you see day. You look at it this way, you see night. So there is a second message different from the first. So here you can just see it as a picture. I drew it, it's a picture. But if you look at it with perspective, you see a hole here. So they have paintings like this, and a dog will come to here and will not continue on the painting. Or this is an anamorphic statue. You look at it from the side, you see just random pieces in the air. You look at it from the front, you see a face. Okay. So this is the meaning of anamorphic. There is a second image there, depending on the angle. So that's why we call it anamorphic. So cryptography is very successful with end-to-end encryption and so on. But all the success of modern cryptography relies on two assumptions that are implicit. And one assumption is the receiver privacy assumption. The receiver key remains secret. Because if it's not secret, if everybody has it, then there's no meaning to encryption. The second assumption is the sender freedom assumption. If the sender is not free to choose the message, there's no need even to encrypt. If I tell you, send this message, and you send it, you get no privacy. So there are two assumptions that are very implicit in the cryptographic literature. And people say, you know, two more assumptions. You assume that factoring large numbers is hard, so assume two more things. But there's difference between the two assumptions. The assumptions that there is all-powerful authority, no receiver privacy, is different. Why is it different? Because the assumption like factoring number is a claim about nature or a claim about complexity theory, which is supposed to describe natural phenomena. And the other two are just normative. It's assumption about society. It's not an assumption that is naturally occurring in objects like large numbers that we use for encryption, but it's something else. So assume they don't hold this. So we assume that these two assumptions do not hold. So for example, there is escrow of all keys. Somebody gives his key to the authorities. And anamorphic cryptography is investigate how to retain the privacy, the security of crypto system in this setting, that you don't have this normative assumption, that the law actually tells you you have to encrypt messages given by the authorities. The keys are all in the authority's hand. How you use it nevertheless. And this is in order to give direct technical evidence that it is futile to try to restrict encryption. Because if you allow me to have certain cryptographic system, there is another way, the anamorphic way, to use it for decryption. And cryptography, therefore, by nature, cannot be controlled because under the utmost control, you still able to generate privacy. And Of course, this is the attacker gets the keys and dictate messages, but these are remote attacks. We don't allow the attacker to sit on the user machine, because if the attacker is sitting on the user machine, then it doesn't matter that it happens on the user machines or it happens somewhere else. This is impersonating the user. This is acting on behalf of the user. So not this. So the setting is we let the user work, but we give them restrictions. I mean, the adversary sitting in millions of machines is different than millions of machines collaborating with the authorities, or thousands of machines collaborating with the company. And so we started it in 22, anamorphic encryption, private communication against the dictator, examples and models, and then we continue in 23. And it's like this. The adversary has the secret key, and he can decrypt with it. But the approach is, the anamorphic approach is that there will be two secret keys, SK0, SK1. And there will be two plaintext M0 and M1 in the same ciphertext. And in one ciphertext, two messages. And using the anamorphic scheme with the two secret keys and using the same scheme without anamorphic message, when there's only one message, is completely indistinguishable. So when you give it the key SK0, that's fine, and you can claim there is no other key. And that's a little bit, saying this a little bit more formally, that there's a public key and a secret key and a message M, but in fact there are SK0, SK1, and two messages. Okay? So we repurpose the scheme to have two messages under one ciphertext. And by the way, none of the schemes that we showed that has the anamorphic properties was designed to have anamorphic property. It was designed just to have a crypto system with one message. And that's the beauty of it. We take an existing scheme and we showed, there is a way to make it anamorphic, which means people designed it, they didn't know about anamorphic. They just designed it to send one message. But it's the nature of cryptography that you can embed a second message. This is exactly what we did. So that's the futility of controlling crypto system to getting all the keys. I give you the key, but I can still collaborate with the user and use it. And you tell me, use only this system. And I use only this system. You have the key. You tell me which messages to send. I use it. I just talk with my friend. I whisper in the ear. I say, ta, 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 ta. And then we can use it, comply with the requirements of the authority, of the adversary, and still send a second message. Okay? So we show that chosen ciphertext secure systems have this anamorphic property. Systems like Goldwasser-Mikhaili, Payet, RSA OAEP, which is in the standards, and symmetric cryptography, El-Gamal-based system, all have anamorphic properties. And these things are many years they've been designed. Like this is from 90. This paper with Naor was it 1990. So I don't have time to go into all this, but there is in chosen ciphertext secure system, usually there are two keys. One of them encrypt the message, the other encrypts the message, and there is not even a decryption key. And there is a zero-knowledge proof that proves that the two things are the same. And we had the two encryptions in this system just in order to be able to prove chosen ciphertext security. Then in anamorphic, we use the two encryption, one to send the message and the second one to send the anamorphic message, and claim that we don't have the decryption key once we encrypt it. So I'm not going to go over the details and the proofs, but there is a proof. And when the sender and the receiver, they share this additional key, then they can get the second message. I can send you the second message. And every probabilistic encryption scheme can be made anamorphic by taking the randomness field and replacing it with a pseudo-random permutation that looks random. That is actually an encryption, and if I share the symmetric key of this pseudo-random permutation with the receiver, it can decrypt from the randomness field. And the third method is if the randomness is recoverable, then the other guy can actually recover the random field and get it. If it's recoverable either directly or with the knowledge of the secret key. And there is also sender anamorphic schemes that it's another way of using it. I'm sending to user one the message that I was told to send, but the same ciphertext with the public key of another user is a different message. That's another way of doing it. Not even sharing, but having two public keys, just agreeing which public key to use. Okay, and in August, we are going to present another scheme in which there is no need to share the second key between the sender and receiver. So everybody can come, and if the scheme is anamorphic, can send me an anamorphic message just from the public key in the public key directory. And now, even more, if direct sender-receiver encryption is disallowed. So take it that from one guy to send to another guy, it has to send it to this adversary, and the adversary encrypts to the receiver the clear message. Because maybe they read our papers and now they don't allow it. But now, if it's like this, how does this guy knows that it really comes from this guy? If you allow this guy to send a message and say, oh, this comes from this guy, why do you believe it? So in order to believe it, you need to allow signature of the origin. So now we have signature. So all you allow is, I'm sending this message, sign it, and it moves it with the signature. So we show that signature scheme, cryptographic signature scheme, also have anamorphic channels. Anamorphic signature, and this was last August. So these are pretty fresh results. Okay, I'm running out of time, so I'm not going into the variations of possible thing, but I will tell you ways, in principles, how to embed the anamorphic message. If the verification process exposes a random value, a pseudo-random encryption can be embedded in this random value. And this happens, for example, in the Bonnet-Boyen signature scheme. And sometimes in order to expose this random value, you need the knowledge of the trapdoor. And this happens, for example, in El-Gamal encryption. In order to recover the randomness, you also need to know the trapdoor of the signer. So we share it, and then we can use it for encryption. In this pseudo-random encryption that pretends to be just randomness. And in that paper, we showed the two paradigms of encryption, of signing. One, the three-message public coin protocol, which is known as a Fiat-Shamir transform, that turns into a signature, results in symmetric anamorphic, and the system that with Naor we did in '89, based on universal one-way hash function, which builds on a one-time signature of Diffie and Lamport. We can also do it, and the logic of this paper is implemented in the post-quantum signing of systems like Sphinx Plus that is standardized now. So it's not just theoretical result, there are practical systems that are going to be used. So overall, it gives a technical evidence of the futility of this trying to control cryptography. Repurposing and thinking maliciously gives useful insight into the following, that cryptography has naturally anamorphic properties because it typically uses randomness, it typically uses certain guarantees, it typically the ciphertext expand on the clear text, and you may have anamorphic. And we don't claim anything about cryptographic control and policies. This is for other people. It's beyond the scope. This is just the mathematics and the technical aspect. And people are writing papers, extension of it, so people added properties to anamorphic encryption. They show that homomorphic schemes have anamorphic. We are going to show public key, the CCA secure public key system, explanation why they have anamorphism, and so on. So general conclusion. So in the second part with the signature and so on, I skipped. I didn't cover the nitty-gritty technical details, but you can find them in the literature. So in general, just following specification does not mean a system cannot be exploited for other tasks. And if you learn in cryptographic courses that the modern cryptographic design philosophy of implementation, proving correct and secure, as specified, and that's the way to go, it's a fallacy, and this shows it because of the additional properties. And modified context, modified purpose, and so on can be done. And there is a natural cycle here, the understanding of this. We have a definition, we have a design, coming out of the definition, going with the definition, then there is implementation and proof, which refers to the definition, the implementation to the design goals of the primitive. And then you embed it in the system. Now you have something embedded in the system. It's a different object. It's not what you define. It has other properties. And this is what this malicious cryptography reveals. So it's a very interesting life cycle with math, theory, CS, practice, considerations, interleaved, because once you go back to the system and core embedding, and now this is the way we put it in system, you don't leave it at the system level. Look at it from theoretical point of view. What is this? Okay? Is there more there? So I wanted to say that I'm looking at theory, then it is in application, and I look for extended theory of application. I wanted to be the original guy that said this, but I'm not. Leonardo da Vinci, perhaps the first modern scientist in the West, said two things. He said, he who loves practice without theory is like a sailor boarding a ship without a rudder and compass, without the navigation tools of the time, and never knows where he may cast. So this is like, I go into the ship, I don't have my navigation tool because this is my theory to guide me, and it goes wherever. He said A, so practitioners should know theory. He also said, point B, theory without practice cannot survive and dies as quickly as it lives. I give it to students and I say, guys, if you do theory, remember point A and then point B. If you do practice, remember point B and point A. There's no difference. You have to remember these points. There is a connection. There is even, so I said, okay, this is ancient, but what about computer science? Am I the original guy to say that we have to develop theory of implementation? Well, turn out I'm not. So for Neumann, in 1956, he wrote a beautiful paper, Probabilistic Logics and the Synthesis of Reliable Organisms from Unreliable Components. If you read the system, nobody read the paper, nobody read these papers because they think it's too old. For Neumann was building these creatures that are called computers. And he was the leading mathematician of the time, and he was talking with engineers. And then he wrote the paper, and in the paper, criticizing Turing, he says the equivalence of machines and logic, for example, partial recursive function defined Turing machines, and vice versa. This equivalence, he said, it's not for real. Why? I dealt with machine, he's saying, and machine components fail. So it's a piece of paper, they are equivalent, but machines, real machines, are not like this. Machines are built to fail. So, for example, they need redundancy and things like this. But it doesn't stop at, okay, there is some practice, we'll put redundancy in this. No, it motivates me for new mathematics. Instead of just doing logic, I'll do probabilistic logic with failures. So this is the thing. So I thought I'm so happy I'm doing it, and I'm so on. And then I saw that I was sitting on the shoulders of giants in this sense, and it's good. It's good. Okay, so my approach was validated before by very, very, very famous people. And this is good. So the cycle of various forms of incarnation of cryptographic primitives, from definition to implementation, logically driving properties from design to embedding in system environment, will derive the desired property, but will not preclude other properties which can be hidden to some player in some setting. So, when you deal with cryptography, do not look only for logical implication. Instead, look also for illogical ones. Something that nobody believes that can happen, it can happen nevertheless. And that's the take from this talk. Thank you very much.
Anyone have questions?
Does it work? Ah, yes.
Yeah.
My question is, with things like the management engines built into like all main boards, where basically everything you do on your computer is like somehow accessible to some black box that also has internet access and so on and so forth. Like, uh, is there anything that can be done, or is there ways to basically just
Yeah, I read
from usage of cryptography, the management, could the management engines, for example, like from the patterns of execution going on, figure out that you're doing to cryptography and just capture things in plain text and just send them to the dictator?
Yeah, there is a complete field about the second part of your question is just from the computation, from the physics of the computation, which is the benign attacks, not like malicious cryptography that somebody maliciously built the algorithm differently. There is a whole field of side channel attacks that deal with this and countermeasures and how to build things. And people are checking the implementations that they don't leak, and they take countermeasures seriously to reduce the effect. And so, for example, the delay that you get the answer gives you some answers about the key. So you can add randomness and things like this. For malicious, most of the people that develop cryptography, and they said your computing base is completely trusted. That's the first part of the scheme. What do you do then? And the answer is, I did another work called threshold cryptography, in which let's say you do a signature and you sign from multiple devices, not necessarily manufactured by the same guy, and the key is split into this, let's say, 21 boxes, and you need 13 of them. You need to break 13 of them, and in order to produce a signature, you need 13 of them to produce partial signature that can be combinable to a signature. And this is, you see the logic of redundancy of failures. And yeah, sometimes you need to do it if you don't trust your computing base. And there are many, many, many issues in pure security research that try to, it's beyond cryptography, to reduce the leakage, do shielding, do electromagnetic shielding of the processors that are doing cryptography, and things like this. So it's interesting. And I worked on leakage, I worked on redundancy, I worked on over the years, and it all has meaning. So in 93, 94, published the first, not the first, but the first full specification of this threshold crypto system. T out of n have to act, T out of n need to be, T plus 1 need to be broken to actually break the key and things like this. And that was in a theory paper in a theory conference. And now blockchains are using it. And so on. So that paper from '89 that I mentioned was done theoretically to show that it's part of foundations, that you can have signature based on one-way permutations without trapdoor, because RSA signature and so on require trapdoor. And the purpose was theoretical, but now post-quantum cryptography, Sphinx Plus, uses the same idea. So things start with theory, and they survive the test of time, they get more efficient, and they can be implemented in practice. And sometimes you work in a company and you have a practical problem, you need to solve it, and then you need to develop new theory or extend the knowledge, the mathematics to solve it. It goes both ways.
Okay, one more question. Okay, if there's no question, let's thank the speaker.